after this on video. So one of the things that I want you all to be sure that you're practicing today, AJ, be sure you're giving me all of your attention. We haven't started yet. Is using comparison and contrast to talk about these three texts. So any questions we have, any confusions, anything that relates to these ideas of savagery, of peace, of justice, of injustice, bring them to the fore. I have a couple of questions that should push us a bit around these ideas, but be sure that we are attending to our community agreements, that we are listening, we are watching our airtime, and we're bringing people into the conversation. All right, whenever you all are ready.
I have a question.
And you all should be taking notes, so you may want to split your screen.
So if we were doing like the chat, would we not have to take notes? Because last time I was on the chat,
Exactly.
I did not take notes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Those are your notes.
Okay.
So it's not that you don't have to, those are your notes.
So just to be clear.
I'll come over and talk with you in 1 second. I'm gonna get this.
Okay.
So if you're in the chat, you all should be quiet. And you're talking with your Twitter fingers.
Wait, what was your Socratic name?
So your question or the statement is a civilization cannot exist without savagery. So that's sort of our inciting statement. And however you answer, I implore you to toss around both sides of that argument. Okay? And I'm gonna push you guys a little bit too. All right, according to the three texts we read. Let's go.
Are we being recorded right now?
F to pay respects.
Okay, I believe that a civilization can exist without savagery.
I agree, because savagery just makes all people stressed, and then it leads to wars. Yeah.
I agree, but like it has to have be like an actual functioning society,
Yeah.
and like if it's like, say it's like an anarchy filled, like say it's just a purge and everything, you're gonna need like something to show an example, like a jail or something like that. Like it can, but there's always gonna be some kind of
I
people.
mean,
that are always
savagery,
like,
when you need it, like,
Yeah.
like people who deserve it.
if it's
But I don't
required.
think like in the lottery, like when people's name got picked out of, like, when
That
they
is
got a lottery.
savagery.
Yeah, like I don't think that you need that for society.
I think like the prisons, like having prison and having laws and like, a government is good, but not doing what the lottery did.
Nevertheless, savagery sometimes can be a good part of a government and like a society, because sometimes people like are in the wrong and they like are fighting back. Like you need to be able to fight back too. And I'm not saying that like all the time savagery is good, but savagery isn't always bad.
In the same way, savagery is sometimes good because it can teach you how to, I don't know.
Well, like in contrast to that, you need, like I agree with him. I like you need savagery for like when people deserve it, but like what Caitlin was saying too, in the lottery, it's not like you don't need that. Like a functioning society doesn't need that to survive.
So I
Yeah.
heard you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Charlie. One thread I want us to sort of tease out a bit is, because I heard you say it twice, and I was waiting for someone to challenge it, is what makes someone deserving of savagery versus undeserving? And then where might we find this in our texts? Because we have the Stanford Prison Experiment, we have the lottery, and we have Lord of the Flies. So what would make someone deserving of quote-unquote savagery, and what would make someone undeserving of savagery?
In each text, there's not really anything that's like the people don't deserve savagery. I mean, like in the lottery, Miss Hutchins, it was just like a superstition, and she was killed for like no reason. They had no reason. It was just like on accident. Peggy and Simon were killed on accident too. I mean, they thought they were throwing rocks at Piggy, but they didn't mean to actually kill him. They thought Simon was the beast. I wouldn't even say the prisoners deserved to be beaten over and over by the guards. I mean, in the text there's nothing that shows that, but I would say if they killed someone or did some kind of savagery to another person, they would be deserving of savagery towards them.
In contrast to what Charlie said about how Miss Hutchinson, or the woman, wasn't, like that was an accident for when she was killed. It wasn't an accident because once the name was drawn, everyone knew that she was going to be killed. Like, it wasn't an accident.
Well, I
when
mean,
they
it was
killed
an
her.
accident that she got drawn.
I mean,
like-
not really.
It was-
It
It was based on chance.
Well, an accident
It
is
wasn't
something
an
that
accident, it
doesn't
just
happen on purpose,
wasn't
and I mean, it
like-
wasn't meant to be.
Like, it wasn't like a group of people got together and said, all right, today we're gonna try our hardest to kill Mrs. Hutchinson. They kinda all woke up and said, all right, well, one of us is gonna die, we don't know who it's gonna be. That's just the way life goes. So she wasn't killed because of, I don't know, like someone didn't like her, or it was strategic. It was more of, this is a tradition, and she got drawn accidentally.
Noelle, I want you to finish what you were talking about. Can you explain that a little more? I think Noelle is on to something.
Yet when it said that Miss Hutchinson it was an accident that she was killed, it wasn't an accident because everyone knew that there was going to be a death that day, and it wasn't planned that it would have been her, but it's still savage that someone just gets killed for no reason. Like, there's no reason for
You don't have to raise your hand.
someone
you
to
can.
get
Along
killed.
with that, it's just a
So-
superstition.
I kind of feel like, what is savagery, Like, it pops up in many different forms, but each person could have their own definition. Like, you could, in the previous prompt, the civilization without savagery, what does savagery entail? Are you, like, not allowed to kill animals and eat them? Are you, not allowed to, so I kind of feel like savagery, I don't know, not that it doesn't exist, it's just kind of a part of everything. Cause, in The Lord of the Flies, it could be described as savage how they killed the pig. But, they ate it for food, and it could be described as savage how they killed, Mrs. Hutchinson in the lottery, that they were, in a sense, they were doing it for food. They believed that brought them food. So, I agree that all of those could be considered savage, but I think really anything can be considered savage, and I don't think it's possible to have a civilization without it.
I agree with you because it's different in all the stories you read. Like, for instance, in Lord of the Flies, savagery was kind of like them killing the pig and them like trying to survive. Whereas in was the one we just read, like the story about the prison and the lottery.
The Stanford Prison Experiment.
Yeah, the Stanford Prison Experiment. That was more like on like the people, if that makes sense. I don't know how else to explain that.
I would say that in society, savagery is not a necessity, but it's a recurring thing. It's a recurring trend because, if you think about it, we're humans. We're not perfect, so there's going to be conflict. It's not, society isn't crucial to have it, but it's pretty much it's going to happen.
I definitely agree. I feel like it's possible, just maybe not with humans, or if it is with humans, it's going to be a really small population, and they all have the common goal of not just surviving, but surviving in the kindest way possible, without doing anything bad or negative.
I would have to disagree with that because in contrast, in the prison experiment, I don't think that's really an instinct or what they try to do because in the Stanford Prison Experiment, they ended up, the guards ended up conforming to their roles and being savage to prisoners, and prisoners ended up, telling the other prisoners to get them in trouble so they would be, better.
Yet, even though the Stanford project started off as just an experiment, and they were part of like the rules and stuff. They found out as they were going that they started to conform into the rules, and they were being savage to each other for really no reason, and the violence that was in the Stanford experience, like no one deserved it, yet they still did it, and yeah.
That's why I was saying, like, that's kind of their escape and their reason. It's just they kind of want to be better than the other people. Like, they're abusing their power.
Yeah.
What do you think, Genevieve?
Well, like, sort of going back to like the prison thing, at the end it said like they didn't realize they were doing it, like they didn't realize they were going behind each other or like being savage to each other. But for like the lottery, they like knew what they were doing, like they knew they were gonna kill her, and they sort of did it in a savage way. Like their beliefs, that's perfectly fine because they like strongly believed that if we don't sacrifice someone, then we're not gonna get food. And like I guess that's fine, but like the way they killed her is not really fine for that. Like,
In contrast, do we think that the savagery in The Lord of the Flies was purposeful?
What do you mean?
And
Like,
you
give an
do.
example.
Like, do you think they purposely tried to kill Simon, or do you think it was more of an
I don't
accident because they
think-
couldn't tell that it was him?
They did say in the book that it was dark and they couldn't really see, and they were all hyped up about. I think they just
Killing
killed
the
a pig. Yeah.
They thought it was the beast.
So
Yeah.
That was
I
kind
mean,
of their own
there's not really an
excuse.
excuse for like accidentally killing someone. I mean, if you could say, but I don't think it was intentional.
What do you think about Piggy's death too?
Well, they
That was-
were trying to hurt her.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
wanted to kill.
In the book, Jack even says, I think the quote is like, "You see that? I meant to do that," or something.
And complementary to what Charlie said, although they might not have meant to kill Piggy, the stone rolling off was caused by the savages in Jack's group, and that caused Piggy to die. And like isn't an excuse of just like, oh, I didn't think that was gonna happen, because they were trying to hurt him and it went too far, and that was them being savages that caused Piggy's death.
Yeah, also, I just want to point out, like this is in comparison and contrast, I just want to point out that the Stanford prison experiment, that was like actually real, and the lottery and Lord of the Flies were not. Those were just stories. Like, so I think the Stanford prison experiment might point out a more accurate belief of savagery, justice, and injustice.
If in the book, Lord of the Flies, if it was a civilization, a functioning civilization, do you think that the way Piggy died, do you think like that Jack and all of them should have been punished for it?
I mean, there was really no way to punish them.
Because they were the
Jack
leaders.
had his own little like group, his own little clans. There was no really way to punish him.
Do you mean maybe once they got rescued? Once they were rescued, should they be punished or?
Yeah, like once they got back to their normal life, where they were at a functioning civilization.
But then there's no way to punish him because how would they have proof except
Yeah.
for that Piggy wasn't there? I mean, they had no proof that anybody killed him.
Like maybe once they got back to their homes and stuff, people would have, like the people who were under Jack's control, they have felt more power and told the truth.
And when they got rescued, they did say there were 2 bodies that were left back. So
Technically 3, because the little kid who was on fire.
And maybe the pilot too, because
Yeah.
he
It's
drifted
maybe
out to the
4.
sea.
Wasn't that someone else? Because I thought like he kind of parachuted onto the island in the middle of the book, not very beginning when they
Whatever
dropped.
happened to the parachute?
Yeah, they never mention him.
He drifted.
He got
There was
killed in the air in the plane.
Yeah, there
They
was
never
something that
said
happened
that.
in the air, but it said
Yeah,
it was
they-
right after they killed Simon. That it implied that the pilot, as Simon is dead and drifts away, so does the pilot kind of drift away into the water, and so they never know exactly what happens to the pilot.
So the
Well-
parachute guy was the pilot.
It's implied that he was the pilot of the plane. We could say that he's not as well. We could say that he's something else.
Yeah, I would say.
But it seemed like he was the pilot of that plane, and he tried to eject, but something happened in the air, and or when he came to the island where because he was hanging by the parachute. What were you gonna say, Charlie?
I would also say that like the plane kind of went down in flames in the beginning of the book, and he kind of parachuted in like the third or fourth chapter, I
Yeah,
think.
it seemed like days later.
Yeah.
But
and-
the body is
I
found
think
days
that's
later.
when
No,
Isn't
no,
it-
he says something drifted onto the island.
Yeah.
But does it mean that this man was? I feel like this is
Like he was-
minutia, so I apologize. But I think, well, this is my reading of it because we can all have different readings. It seemed to me from the details in the text that he was dead,
Yeah.
and that maybe he could have stood a chance of living, but that by the time Simon finds him, he's dead.
I thought while reading it the first time through, I thought he was alive, and then reading it the second time through, I realized that wasn't really possible because the book does make a big deal of saying, oh, the limp figure. When he's first announced in I think Beast from the Air, the book makes a big deal of saying, oh, the limp figure floated down to the air and just lied there for a few days and then slowly drifted upwards the mountain.
Sam, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We have a couple minutes, and I wanted to introduce another idea or have a question for you all. So you all are talking about this idea of savagery, and I hear Charlie and at least a couple of other people bring up this idea that perhaps, savagery isn't survival. I think one consistency I notice across the fictional texts that alludes to a possibility of existing in the Stanford prison experiment is this idea that savagery ultimately breeds death. And so my wondering is if the argument that many people are taking on is that savagery is essential to survival and ultimately savagery leads to death, then these are two antithetical ideas, meaning these ideas clash against each other, meaning those things aren't possible. So I'm wondering if we can grapple with that. Does savagery ultimately lead to death? If so, what actually should be possible? What should be happening in a society or civilization?
I think that savagery leads to conflict, which can lead to death. I don't think it directly leads to death, personally.
Sorry. Likewise to what Will was saying, I think that savagery doesn't always lead to death, and there are savage actions that can be taken without people ending up dead. But in some cases, savagery does directly correlate to death.
What do others?
I agree, but I also think it can be. I think it can be both. So let's take a super extreme case. I don't know, Billy and Tommy are kindergartners, and Billy tells on Tommy, and then Tommy gets mad at Billy, and after school he punches him with a scissor blade or whatever. And extreme case, one of them dies. So in that situation, savagery, which is, a friend turning on another friend, led to conflict, which led to death. But it can also be like in, separate example, a friend turns on a friend just because and kills him outright. That doesn't usually happen, but it happens. And that's what savagery is.
All right, thanks everyone. So, homework.